Uh. Pero ya sonara. Vale. Oops. Hello. Hello, welcome everyone. Today I'm very pleased to finally introduce Gail Bichler. Today I say finally because we started these Elisava Master Talks back in 2019, and in March 2020 Gail was in town. She was ready to give her talk, and when suddenly a very little thing, invisible, microscopic thing, do you remember, called COVID-19, get into our way. So the very same day of her lecture, we had to cancel, and Gail had to quickly fly back to the US before our international borders were shut down for quite a long time. So today, more than 3 years later, we have Gail here successfully, closing the second edition of the Elisava Master Talks. I'll try to briefly introduce Gail Bichler, if that's possible. So Gail began working in the New York Times in 2004. First freelancing, but then she became a staff designer, and then step by step she became like a deputy art director, then art director. In 2014 she was appointed like design director, and since a few years ago she's the actual creative director. And there are many unusual things around Gail Bichler, but for me this is one of the first, is the fact that she has developed her path career for more than or nearly 20 years, and probably will continue, hopefully some years more, in the same place, like going through creating all these different stages. The second relevant thing I think about Gail is the fact of her capacity and skills to build, maintain, and make grow an amazing team of talented people that surrounds her, delivering outstanding work week after week. I think it's very, very uncommon to keep together this talent, these teams that work in perfect harmony for many years. And the third thing that strikes me, and I guess you too, is how on earth it's possible to be so good every week. Because she has, imagine the pressure of having like a weekly deadline and hitting the nail on the head brilliantly week after week, 52 weeks a year, and for many years. I think it's quite an amazing thing to accomplish. So Gail and her team developed the weekly magazine. They do also many specials throughout the year, comprising the print and the digital version, as well as other experiments on VR and new formats. I think that we can probably say that the New York Times Magazine is the meeting point of top high-quality journalism and excellent editorial design. So let's see if today Gail is going to reveal part of her magic and share with us some of her tricks. So please give a warm welcome to the great Gail Bichler.
that I really liked that and thought it was a good way to support myself. So when I left college, I went to a small studio in Chicago that designed mostly art books because I wanted to be by that content. And after about 7 years, I went out on my own and did some of the same kinds of projects, mostly books for cultural institutions, publications, work for museums. And I realized during that time that I really am not good at working by myself. The work that I was making just wasn't as good as it would have been if I would have worked with other people, and I wasn't as happy as I could have been. So I moved to New York, and I contacted the creative director at the New York Times. This is the Times building that I work in. And this is really where I found my place. The magazine is at the intersection of so many different things that I love. Stories, art, photography, great writing. And it's incredibly collaborative, as you'll see. Nothing really gets made in a magazine by one person. So I get to work with writers and editors and photographers and artists and other designers. I have a fantastic team at the Times. It's 7 designers and art directors, and we have a really incredible photo team. And the full magazine team is about 75 people. So we have editorial teams and research teams as well. And we collaborate very closely, and that is one of the defining things about the magazine, that design and photography and journalism are so highly integrated, and that they all have an equal voice. So a couple things that are really exciting about working for the Times is the pace. You get to make things in real time for things that are happening in the culture, and that's very exciting. Sorry. Also, the mission, which is, to seek truth and help people understand the world. And that's a mission that I feel really proud of, and something that I can get behind. And additionally, at the magazine, we have a goal of showing people things in unexpected ways and showing them artfully, and really making things that have impact. So a little bit about the history of the magazine. This is the cover of the first magazine. It was established in 1896, and it was originally a broadsheet, and it was a place for literary long-form writing. It was and still is a weekly general interest magazine distributed in the Sunday edition of the paper. I took this picture right before I came here in 2020 of the magazine. You can see right on the front page, there's a huge article about the coronavirus, which I just was in total denial of and got on a plane and came here. Since the magazine comes out weekly, we make 52 issues per year, which is a ton of issues, and we try to be as ambitious as we can every week. And we cover a ton of topics. I think that's also a defining thing about the magazine. So last year we covered menopause, vaccine hesitancy, the war in Ukraine, self-driving cars, the climate crisis, abortion law, and then we did profiles on actors and musicians and politicians, and we even did a story on Icelandic ponies. So because of the variety of topics, we have really different approaches to covers, and those are always driven by the content. So for example, if we're doing a profile of someone, it will likely be a portrait. If we're going to do something on an event, that's going to be documentary photography. But some of the stories that we publish are about ideas. And it's not always clear what the visuals for those should be. And those are really the stories that I love to work on, the ones where you're making a visual for something that maybe isn't inherently visual. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of making those. So this is how we get stories in the art department in manuscript form. Usually when we get them, they're evolving. So for me, a lot of the ideas come from the language. So I tend to read through the stories a couple times, usually, and underline phrases and sketch in the margins. And then once a week, we have a meeting where we discuss upcoming cover stories and talk about the approach we want to take with the art. And in that meeting, I usually ask Jake, our editor, to summarize the story in one sentence, which is really actually incredibly hard to do because the stories are pretty nuanced. And he almost never does it. He's actually pretty good. Some of the other editors, I'll get like a 2-minute kind of explanation with a ton of nuance. But I really try and go back and push and get them to describe it in that one sentence, because I think that if you're going to communicate something visually, it has to be something quite simple in order to be direct. it can have nuance, the image can have nuance, but you kind of can't expect people to necessarily pick up on it. Maybe they'll revisit it and see that, but I'm trying to usually make something that is, very direct. And so once I get that information about how the story is framed, and often that line also tells me something about the tone. Sometimes we reach out to an illustrator or an artist to come up with an idea for the cover, and sometimes we come up with our own ideas. So for example, when Donald Trump first entered the presidential race in 2015, we published a story on him, and it was a profile that grappled with the fact that a lot of people really wanted to dismiss him as a sideshow, but in fact he was really dominating the political conversation. So we had the idea to make an image of him as a helium balloon. And this is the art direction of that. We worked with the illustrator Stanley Chow. And as far as I'm concerned, the first image is Trump on a balloon, and the last image is Trump as a balloon. And all the corrections in between are about correcting for the distortion that happens when you put something on a curved surface, and then getting some of the facial details right, and the color of the skin in the last one. And then we made a bunch of balloons. I think we made about 25. And we shot them in varying states of inflation and positions. And this was the cover. And we published it without a cover line. We were purposefully trying to be ambiguous, letting readers wonder, is someone holding that balloon? Is it going to drift off the page? We left those things open to interpretation. I find that sometimes people are surprised that we make these things for real, because it'd be a lot easier to make them in CG. So for example, this is the cover of our 2016 design issue, which was about redesigns. We did actually create this wheel. It definitely would have been easier to make it digitally, but I think it was better to make the real thing, because I think that photographing real objects lends an authenticity to things that readers can feel. And also, we have fun doing it. So about a month after the January 2017 Women's March, we published a story, not on the march, but on tensions rising within the feminist movement. And I decided to concept them myself, concept the cover myself. And these are all of my terrible sketches that I made. I have to show them and give explanation verbally, but Jake does seem to understand them. He picked this one. And the idea was to knit the word resist in hot pink yarn and then fray it. And that was, a nod to the pink hats that people wore at the march. So with this idea, I knew that that the execution would have to be pretty sophisticated. Otherwise, it was going to end up looking really sloppy and looking like a craft project. So I reached out to Jessica Walsh to work on it with me. And we settled on this type and this layout, but with the caveat that the distressing of the type would actually be the thing that was going to give it its editorial edge. So for example, this cover kind of feels like a command to resist. And this feels more like a comment about tensions within the movement. This is a mock-up of the knitted type. And this is the real thing, and Jessica working on it with someone from her studio. And we went back and forth a lot about scale and what yarn was going to fray the best. This was the yarn that frayed the best, but it wasn't quite the right color. So this was the final cover, and we color corrected for it in post. So in May 2020, about 6 weeks into the pandemic lockdown, we'd done a whole bunch of different kinds of coverage on the pandemic. We'd done stories on essential workers. We did something on first responders. We did something inside the public hospitals in New York. And we did something in funeral homes. And we decided to publish a different kind of issue. And it was about the collective experience of quarantine and what it felt like for those of us at home. And so we reached out to a bunch of artists and writers and photographers, and we asked them to contribute to it. But as far as the cover goes, we really wanted something that got at what that time felt like, the kind of monotony of it and the strange, slow passage of time. And we were working with the illustrator Brian Ray on some drawings for the inside. And so we asked him to take a stab at the cover. And Jake had the idea to possibly do something with the kind of classic marks on the wall to represent time. And we did pass that idea along to Brian. But we also asked him to explore some more unexpected ways of showing the passage of time. And he started to do that. We liked how this looked, but we didn't think it read as time. I love this one with the vignettes, but it tends to be harder to make something impactful with that number of images. He did something with the calendar. The clock. We thought this was getting somewhere, and we actually really liked this sketch. We didn't like the snail as much, but we liked, the lines. They felt like they were indicating that kind of passage of time and the person in it. So we asked him to remove the snail and make the lines more dense and have the person drawing the line. And then we experimented with different people on the inside. And that's the final cover. And we liked how it really got that feeling of claustrophobia as well. So in 2022, we published an excerpt of a book from one of our writers, J. Caspian Kang. And the excerpt was about being Asian American at this moment with everything going on, with our president calling the coronavirus the China virus, and the anti-Asian hate crimes that were happening. And he was asking the question, what does being Asian American really mean when it encompasses so many different groups of people and different experiences? So when you're designing a conceptual cover, you're often looking for symbols, a common language or things that people will understand what they mean, and hoping to use them in a new way or just twist them to say something new. So in thinking about this, there aren't a lot of symbols for Asian American. So I realized that it was going to have to be a person or people, but not one person, because then it would look like it was about that person in a recognizable way. Whoops. All right, so I thought of this artist, Kensuke Koike, who does these really beautiful collages where he cuts up and rearranges portraits. And I thought that idea, spoke to identity. And one thing I'm going to mention, I've shown a few of these collaborations, but one of the great privileges really of this job is being able to collaborate with all these different artists and have a platform where you can email somebody and ask them to work with you, and a lot of times they'll say yes. It's really such a pleasure. So this is the cover that he made. The line was written by the editors after they saw what we made. So I think that's important because sometimes they give us a line and we go out and illustrate it, and sometimes they respond to what we make. But that relationship between type and image on the cover is so important, and it really needs to be pulling in the same direction, those two things. This is a little video that shows his process. It's a little bit misleading because it's really the tail end of the process. He normally works with found imagery, but we shot images for the cover. And then we went back and forth quite a bit about where those different squares should go. But I think his process is really cool. So more recently, we did a story on the cardboard economy and how everyone is ordering stuff online. And the pandemic really accelerated that. We're constantly getting cardboard, breaking it down. It's everywhere. It's the stuff of our lives. So I thought we should make the illustration out of cardboard. And I reached out to the illustrator, Todd St. John. And he did a bunch of sketches. This is a typographic one. A cardboard world. Cardboard person climbing up cardboard steps. Cardboard United States, which, this was global, so that wasn't going to work. Cardboard city. Yeah, cardboard person with the cardboard dog. And a cardboard person thinking cardboard thoughts. So I really liked all of these, actually. But my favorites were the bottom right, the last two. And I think that the one with the cardboard figure really spoke to me in terms of being more simple and kind of iconic. I thought that the other one maybe could be a continuation of that cover on the inside. So Todd mocked this stuff up in CG so we could look at the backgrounds and maybe look at some of the details of the boxes. And then he made the figure. It was done at half scale, so he constructed all of the boxes. And that's before it was shot. And that's the cover. So I've talked about conceptual covers as a way to visualize abstract ideas, but we often do a kind of conceptual photo shoot with celebrities as well. So in 2019, we published a story about Madonna when she turned 60, and the story was about her legacy and her longevity. So we wanted to use both an archival image and a modern day image. And we reached out to the photographer and street artist, JR. You might know him for his large-scale photographic pastings, like you see here. And initially we thought maybe he would be able to paste a big picture of Madonna onto a building, and we could have her maybe sitting in a window of the building and photograph that. But he reserves those large-scale works for things with humanitarian messages. So we decided to move it indoors and work in a studio, and still do something with a large-scale image, but possibly have her lie on it or break through it. So we did a lot of advanced planning for this. That's JR in his studio. We sorted through a lot of different archival images, and we had to get the rights to those images. We were hashing out the proportions. There's some printouts of the archival imagery that we picked. And we settled on this image by Stephen Meisel for the cover. And this is the setup. JR's assistants printed this thing out large scale and stapled it onto a wooden frame. And this is the cover. The archival image is actually darker because in the end we decided to print a flood of silver ink under it, which had a really nice kind of shiny effect. Working at the magazine, you do get to meet celebrities sometimes. You never really know how they're going to be. Madonna showed up. She flew in on a private plane, and she had about 30 people with her. So that was very different from someone like Frances McDormand, who we shot several years ago, and she showed up completely by herself. So you never know. I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of the magazine now. The typical magazine every week runs 5 or 6 columns. And 4 feature stories. So just as an example, this is a regular issue. This is a cover illustrated by Cristiana Casero. And this is index and contributors page. It's the 5 columns, which are basically templated, but they have new art every week. And then we also run 4 feature stories on different topics. Those are curated to hit different notes. And each one is custom designed by a different designer on the team. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have a small back of book for jump space and the puzzles. But as you can see, the cover and the feature stories are really the place that we put most of our design energy. And I'm going to play a little video of what the magazine looks like in print so you can get a sense of what it looks like week to week.
Searching for where to begin. At a line you walked for days and days. Too smooth to leave a hand. So steps out for the moment. Truth will come through some style. Kicking for the answers. It's like we're right in front of you.
Okay, so that's what the magazine looks like in print. We take a really different approach online, and most of our features are templated, so they all kind of look the same. We do actually make some custom treatments when we think we can make something more of an experience or make something more visual. So for example, this was a story that we did on the skateboarder Tyshawn Jones, who has a really unique, highly athletic style of skating, and that comes from him skating on the streets of New York. So we sent the documentary photographer Philip Montgomery, who we worked with quite a bit, to take photographs of him, but he also made these great video clips of him skating on the streets. So you can see that we were really able to bring this story to life in a way online that was definitely just not possible in print. This is another story that we recently published on the history of sushi in America. It was a story that one of our fact checkers wrote, and there had been a draft of it sitting around for, I don't know, like probably a couple years. Our digital art director read it and got super excited about it and felt like it was, written like a movie. And so she made a mock-up of what this could be with animation, and we got our editors excited about it, and they agreed to publish it. And then she worked with the illustrator Igor Bastidis to make this animated version. And the story was actually really edited a lot to go with the visuals, and that's something that we're doing more and more. And this article is actually being developed into a television series, which is fun. This is another recent story that was written by a Times journalist, David Boddy, who was part of the Visual Investigations Unit at the Times. And that is a really cool job. They're basically digital detectives, so they go online and they analyze, photos, video, social media posts, drone footage, and they use those things to tell stories. So for example, they published a story on Russian atrocities in the Ukraine. They published one on how the Capitol riot unfolded. And David really wanted to use his skills to figure out where his grandfather had grown up in Italy. So we made this story about it. He started with a photo that he found in his mother's basement. And with this, we wanted to really work with experimental forms of navigation to really take readers down the rabbit hole that he went down in trying to figure out, where he lived, and to kind of give them a similar experience to what he had online. And I think that would have been very hard to do in print. So this is one thing that we published online only. Again, a pretty recent story about the proliferation of audio memes. So for decades, memes have been visual. They've been image and type. But TikTok has really changed that and made a space where sounds can memify. So we did this story tracing some of the popular audio memes back to their source materials.
Nobody's gonna know. Nobody's gonna know. They're gonna know. How would they know?
Damn, Daniel. Damn, Daniel.
Let me show you how to do the dance. Dance, dance. Yo, there you go to bed. Hey, 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 come on. Dee-dee-dee-dee, with the left leg.
So now imagine listening to that like 200 times, which is what I think the designers of this piece did. And even when I asked them to make this, they were hesitant. But I really like how it turned out. And sometimes we just want to make a visual experience. So this is a photo essay on Tokyo's Kitchen Town, which is where they make life-size food models that you sometimes see outside of Japanese restaurants. And they're handmade. They have really extraordinary craftsmanship. They're hand-painted. And one thing that I really liked about this format was that there's so many disparate kinds of photography here. We didn't actually use all these different formats in print, but we were able to combine them in an interesting way with having the images roll over each other and make something, I think, really special for online. And one more example of just us seeing an opportunity to do something really visual. This is a story that we published on sail drones, which are unmanned ships that can sail directly into storms like hurricanes and gather data for scientists so they can figure out why the intensity of these storms has increased over the last 50 years. And it was just for us a great opportunity to commission these really beautiful illustrations by Wesley Aldsbrook and also some infographics and make the experience of this immersive. So I mentioned that most of our regular issues are 4 features that are unrelated, but 12 to 15 times a year we do special issues. And those are some of our best design opportunities. So designers come up with a whole identity for the issue, and they figure out a way to package it. We often use different fonts. We change the grid. We really redesign the magazine. And I am going to show you another video that just gives you a sampling of what some of those special issues look like. So some of our best special issues are actually ones where we're not thinking about the magazine as a container for 4 features and really thinking about a way to break that format or do something different and special. This is the cover of our 2016 New York issue, which was about life above 800 feet. And I think it's the most extensive magazine redesign that we've done for any of our special issues. We sent the photographer Jimmy Chin up to the top of One World Trade Center to take this photo. And we published it as a fold-out cover. We did this several years ago while Matt Willey was the art director of the magazine, and this was something that he worked on. And he had the idea to flip the entire issue 90 degrees and create this really vertical format to show New York super tall buildings. And the photo team specially commissioned images for this format. It was really important to us to have everything in this orientation because we didn't want readers to have to kind of flip the magazine back and forth. We thought that wouldn't be a good experience. So even the ads were turned. And in order to have that happen, we had to have our ad sales team go back and ask everyone to redesign their ads, which they did. And Matt drew a vertical typeface to work in this space. We had a map of the buildings over 800 feet. We actually initially thought that we would do over 1,000 feet. And it turns out that there are just not a lot of buildings that are over 1,000 feet in New York, and not actually even as many as I would have thought over 800. I want to give credit to Jake. I think most editors would have just rejected this idea out of hand. And he went with it, and he and the editorial team wrote and rewrote the headlines to work in this design. I think this is the biggest type we've probably ever published in the magazine. We realized when we were making this that the type was really functioning as an illustration. It's pretty hard to read. So we made sure that all the important information was in the subhead. Great portrait. Oops. And even the crossword puzzle was turned, and the issue was pretty well received, for the most part. We knew we would get criticism for doing this. It's one of 52 issues per year, so it allows us to be a little bit freer, but we don't do it lightly. We know that, we're messing with something that people look forward to and they want it in a certain way. So we do it when we think it's going to really add to the experience or is, going to help the content in some way. And also, I just want to mention, I did give Jake a lot of credit for doing this, but when we initially pitched this idea, he said no. We discussed it in a meeting, and he just kind of was, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. And Matt and I really loved the idea and went back and mocked the whole thing up and came back with it. And then he and Kathy Ryan, our photo director, were like, yes, we're going to do that. And I mention this just because I think that sometimes if you believe in something, you really have to fight for it. And one of the things that I have found helpful in that is to have a really talented team that kind of backs each other up and kind of pushes each other to make things that are different. So, supporting each other. And this is what this looked like online. So it had this kind of interactive map, and it had type that grew, and it had some nice animation. So in August 2016, we devoted an entire issue to one 40,000-word story on the history of Arab Spring. That was the product of 18 months of reporting of the writer, Scott Anderson, and we worked with a photographer, Paolo Pellegrin, who took modern-day images for this. But he also had an archive of 20 years of reporting in that region, and we worked with some of those images as well. And from the start, we really envisioned this reading like a book. We got some funding from the Pulitzer Center, and that allowed us to get rid of all the ads in the magazine. But I'm going to be real with you and say that there weren't very many ads, that people did not want to advertise against this content, which happens. But we were actually able to get rid of the back page ad, which was a big deal. I'm going to show you the first 20 pages of the magazine, just spread by spread. So this is the inside cover and the first page. And I guess I just want you to think a little bit about, what a magazine looks like generally when you first open it, how busy it is. Usually has a bunch of ads, and it doesn't look anything as stripped down as this. This was the only ad, which is more like a statement of purpose from the Pulitzer Center. And we didn't have any drop caps or pull quotes. It was like very rigidly formatted. We really wanted it to be serious and have stature. We did actually take this to its logical conclusion, and we made a book out of it. This is the cover of a Voyages issue, which we published in fall of 2018. It's an issue that we publish every year, and it is a travel issue, but it's not a servicey travel issue. It's an issue that takes readers to places that are really visually stunning. But for this issue, we decided to do something a little bit different, and we took our readers on 11 sonic voyages, so places that looked amazing, but also hopefully sounded amazing. So it came with the soundtrack that you could listen to as you turn the pages, almost like you would have at a museum, like an audio tour. This is the opening spread of the feature well, which is a photograph by Philip Montgomery of a volcano in Hawaii. And apart from the index and a brief introduction, the issue had no text, just 50 pages of full bleed images with numbers so that you knew which track to look at, or to listen to, sorry. And the project was really ambitious. We sent photographers and field recorders all around the world, and we produced a bunch of downloadable tracks. We even did an event in front of a live audience. And this is how it worked online. So you were initially given an option right at the start asking if you had the printed magazine. And if you did, you could simply listen to the tracks while you looked through it, or you could experience the whole thing online.
Welcome to the Voyages issue of the New York Times Magazine. I'm your host, Jake Silverstein, the editor-in-chief of the magazine, and today we're going to go all around the planet, looking and listening. We're going to visit all the places marked on this map in front of you, and as we move along, you can scroll to advance or use your arrow keys, or you can just sit back and relax, and the whole experience will autoplay.
I'm going to take you to my favorite destination.
We're back, and our next destination is an urban one, the busy streets of New York City, one of the noisiest places on earth.
It's an acoustic mess. There's horns blaring and people shouting on the street.
That's Brian House, a sound artist from Brooklyn.
For a rat, it's not such a noisy place. The city is actually quiet above the human range of hearing. There's room acoustically up in those higher frequencies where the rats can actually hear each other talk. That's all rats. It's rat voices in downtown Manhattan. So when rats are socializing and courting each other and chastising their kids and everything, they're doing that, way above our range of hearing. And I've recorded that using an ultrasonic microphone and lowered the pitch into the human vocal range. The other thing that we know about these sounds is that it includes rat laughter. And there's no mistaking it. When you hear it, it's like, oh, that's okay. that's the rat laughing.
Yeah, so the rest of the entries were maybe not as odd, but I love this one. And this was another case where the art department actually really had to push to get the idea past edit of, removing all the text. I think initially they wanted to put a larger introduction in the print issue, and they wanted to put deep captions in there so that if you got the magazine, you'd still be able to have an experience with it. But we argued to take those things out because, we thought that the most extreme version of this was the best version. And so, we wanted to push people to experience it the way that we had intended for them to experience it. So more and more we are approaching our special issues as digital first. This is a climate issue that we published pretty recently, and it's about life after 2 degrees of warming, written by David Wallace Wells, one of our writers. It's about the future, so that kind of poses a problem for using photography. And also, it's a dry subject, so we really wanted to kind of try and pull people in and make them want to read this. My computer has a low battery now. I wonder, is there any way to?
We have a plug here.
You do?
Yes.
Okay. I have a cord, yeah. Okay, not going to work, huh? Okay. Okay.
Okay.
All right, great. Thank you. So anyway, we did this issue as a graphic novel style treatment, and we work with the illustrator Anuj Shrestha and also an animator. And because the image and text are so closely intertwined, the designer really helped shape this piece and acted as an editor. And I think that is, one of the exciting opportunities for designers as we work more in the digital space and try and make these things that are, intertwined with image and text. All right, so this one is hard to look at. I'm just going to warn you in advance. So every year at the end of the year, the magazine publishes a lives issue, and it usually celebrates the lives of notable people that have passed that year. So it's usually writers and musicians and thinkers. This past year, we decided to make it about children killed by gun violence. And the occasion for that was that in America, gun violence had recently become the leading cause of death for children. It surpassed car crashes, which I thought was shocking. And we really wanted to publish something on it, and we wanted to tell the stories of these kids, their lives rather than their deaths. So we sent reporters to their hometowns to speak to their family and their friends and to hang out in the places where they hung out. And we wanted to tell personal stories for each kid about a particular moment in time. And we thought it would be really powerful to use photos and videos taken by family and friends. We took advantage of the fact that this is a time where everyone has their phone with them and is documenting things. We also got a lot of stuff off of social media, and in some cases, we were able to get the contents of some of the kids' cell phones. In some cases, we weren't able to get them, and some was because the death was recent and they didn't have the cell phone back. But we thought this was a way to bring these kids to life. Oftentimes when there's a victim of gun violence, you're going to see like a small portrait just of their face. Sorry, this is upsetting when I get a little emotional about it. But this was a kind of way to show really what was lost. And then we also partnered with the graphics desk at the paper to tell a story about who is dying and the inequalities that exist. And projects like this one, they're not as much of a I think they are a design opportunity, but a different kind of design opportunity. But they're really one of the reasons that I love working at the Times, doing these kind of projects that have meaning like this. And to give you a little bit of a sense of what it's like to work at the magazine, the next week we published this issue, which was on the best performances of the year. Great photographs by Ryan McGinley. And these issues were happening simultaneously. And so, they weren't the same designers on these issues, but some of the people working on them were working on both. I was one of them. Photo director was also one of them. So it was a little bit kind of like whiplash, moving back and forth in between these issues where, this was a very extreme version of it. The meetings about the Lives issue, were very emotional, and particularly for the photo editors that were in touch with the families of the kids. And then, this was pretty much pure joy. So you have to you end up compartmentalizing. So this is the last thing I'm going to show you. It's on a much later note. We've done a lot of ambitious stuff. This is one of the most ambitious covers we made. In September of 2015, we made a themed issue on walking in New York. We worked with JR. This was about 5 years before he did the Madonna cover for us. He pasted an image of a walking figure on the ground in the Flatiron Plaza in Manhattan. His people came at 4 a.m. They pasted down 62 strips of paper to make a 150-foot image. And when the shadows were just right, he flew overhead and he photographed it with people wandering over it, many of whom did not notice the image, which kind of fit in with some of the work he was doing. This picture was of someone who had recently immigrated to the United States, and some of the themes of his work were about invisible immigrants. And then at about 7 p.m., they came in and uninstalled it with a power washer. And this was the cover. And this was the inevitable tweet that we all knew was coming. I'm just going to end with a list of designers that contributed to the presentation. And that's it. Thank you. Questions or okay.
Hi, actually my question is, each magazine is supposed to be like launched every week, right? But in some of the issues that you mentioned, you gave like a lot of work to a lot of people, like for example, photographers, writers, and all sorts of people. So do you actually have any sort of planning like beforehand, or do you just work always with a margin of like a week or days, or how do you actually like plan those times?
There's a huge amount of planning that happens. And so we have like a schedule with all the stories on it. So, you know, things are planned out pretty far in advance. Some of the special issues we actually work on for a really long time, like this lives issue that I showed. We started working on that 6 months earlier. It had a big data component, and you know, it was a huge amount of work. But like, you know, within a particular week, we design an issue within a week, but we have all kinds of meetings about upcoming stories, how we're gonna art them. You know, our photo team's pretty incredible. They send people all over the world. You know, they're pretty far out ahead of a lot of the stories. So kind of on any given week, we are designing one issue, but we're dealing with a lot of other things that are happening. And I would say some of the articles too are very long-term. Like some of them, you know, are written over the course of a year or, you know, 6 months. Some are actually a lot faster, and more we're doing pieces that are pretty fast, like maybe 3 weeks. And that's something actually that kind of happened during the pandemic. We used to do a lot more stuff that wasn't exactly on the news. And then, you know, when that happened, there was a moment where there was only one story that people cared about. And so we had to pivot and cover that. And, you know, since then, we've actually done more things that are a little bit more on the news.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, here.
Hello.
Thank you very much for the talk. It was amazing, and I really feel like I need to get out of here and get a copy of the magazine or buy a subscription. It was amazing. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my question was, I was wondering what like a week in your life looks like, because on the one hand, I believe it's probably changes quite much, but then you always have to publish a magazine every week. And I was wondering, like, at your level, is it, like, how's the percentage of actually creative work? And I guess there's a lot of managing also, and you have a big team under your responsibility. Like, how does a week look like? And yeah. Thank you.
I'm in a lot of meetings. I still do a lot of the covers. That's one thing I've tried to hold on to, because I've realized that if I completely let that go, I'm unhappy, because I also like to make things. But you know, I do a lot of hands-on art direction of things with the designers. I do also a lot of management. You know, I actually am working much more recently, having been in this job for the amount of time that I've been in it. It's been important to me to really try and improve as a manager, and, you know, make a good environment for the people that are working there. So I have focused a lot on that more recently. But I would say, like, every morning we come in and we have a planning meeting. And then I have a lot of other meetings with all different kinds of people throughout the day, you know, meeting about different stories, looking at designs. You know, I have a lot of meetings with our photo team, which we, you know, because we collaborate so closely. And then there's a couple meetings that are standard, like we have an art direction meeting that I mentioned earlier, where we try and figure out what we're going to do for the different stories for the art. And we also have a meeting that happens like around 3:30, where we show the designs. We used to actually do that in a much more informal way, where we just like put some stuff on the counter and our editor would come by. But, you know, with moving everything online, it's now like a presentation that everyone makes to like 20 people, which is like, you know, sometimes a little bit harder, because I think in that more informal setting, you know, sometimes we could have a more nuanced conversation. So that's been an interesting change. But hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. In terms of between the digital and the physical format of the magazine,
yeah,
is there like a higher importance placed on the printed version, and then you take those stories and just transform them into digital, or vice versa, or are they two completely different like aspects of the magazine that you curate?
We are in the middle of a digital transformation. So what we're doing right now, I mean, the print magazine has always been the kind of primary product, which I think it can no longer be. So a lot of the things that I showed here were things where we actually, they're like a digital first project, or I even showed one thing that we didn't even, publish in print. So that's something that we're doing a lot more. We are actually in the process of redesigning the magazine so that we can reverse the production process. Because I think just the way that we do it right now is that we make the print magazine and then, we do retrofit it to online for the kind of templated stories. More and more, we now incorporate, some requests for different formats when we hire illustrators and, consider that stuff simultaneously. But I think it's inevitable that when something comes first, there's so many things to do, you're going to put out those fires, you're going to consider it. So we're in the process of trying to reverse that. And it's a pretty interesting idea for a redesign. I've redesigned the magazine a couple times, so I'm finding it really interesting because what we're actually doing is, we have to exist in this ecosystem of the New York Times. And so stuff that we make, it's no longer together in one piece. It's spread out, throughout the website. And we have to be able to get, homepage promotion. So one of the things that we're doing as part of the redesign is we're going and talking to different people around the building and asking them, what does that feed need more of? What does the magazine do that you want to see more of on the feed? And then what we're going to do is probably, we're going to do a digital first redesign where we come up with those kinds of ideas. I mean, the print magazine is really important to me, and I don't think there's, a way that we're going to make anything that isn't going to also work for that. But it is a different way of thinking about it, and I think it could actually lead to some pretty exciting changes in both formats.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Yeah, hi.
I was just wondering what happens when something goes wrong. If someone that you collaborate with doesn't make the results that you expected, or or sometimes if the team is a bit uninspired, what happens then with the tight schedule that I imagine that you have?
Yeah, it's super tight. Occasionally, we usually try and go back and work with it. It's art direction, so we will try and push it to a place that we want it to be. Sometimes we're not able to do that. Occasionally, we've had to recommission something at the very last minute. The editors have a lot more leeway. Sometimes they will come to us and say, oh, this story that's been on the schedule as the cover story for the past couple months is no longer the cover story. We need more time. And then they usually push something forward that means that we actually have to rush and make something. So it is, it can be a very stressful job. And, you do have to publish something. So, yeah, everything is going to be the best. I think that, there's definitely a good amount of variance in what we make. We try and make everything as good as possible. But I think that, one thing that I always think about is the idea that, you're going to have highs and lows, and that is basically because you're trying to push and make something really interesting. If you make something that you kind of know is going to work out, you're going to maybe have a more even medium. So I think the highs and lows are a good thing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hello.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you so much for the talk. Just have one question. How do you envision the future of editorial design? I mean, is it print has an end? How do you see it?
I mean, I don't know that print has an end. I think that people still want to have things in print. I think it's definitely kind of narrowing down. The print things that remain will be high quality. One thing that I can see happening is a kind of compilation of the best stuff that was online being made in print. Or I think it has to be something that people want to have. Something. I think that design actually plays a pretty big role in what that should be moving forward. Just because you have to have some kind of a justification, I think, at this point to to make something that people really want to have. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks. It's a great talk. I am curious to hear more about how you handle the politics of your designs, working for the New York Times, having to kind of negotiate that, especially in the States.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think the magazine has a little bit more leeway than the paper. The paper, basically the entire Times really is meant to be impartial and not be expressing opinions. That said, the magazine does publish pieces that can kind of veer in one direction or another, can be an opinion. And I think as long as we are publishing something that is true to the content, then we're okay. But, for example, we did a story on Trump's legal issues. And, I think New York Magazine did a story on it as well, and they had a picture of him in an orange jumpsuit. That is something that we never could have done because that would basically be us saying he was guilty. Even if it's a kind of hypothetical provocation, we couldn't have done it. What we did publish was like a legal folder that was like stuffed and had a rubber band around it that closed and had a little picture of him, like paper clipped to it. But we have to be pretty careful that we're not making a commentary that is not directly reflecting what the article is saying. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the amazing talk. I'm really curious about when you're choosing what artists to work with, photographers, illustrators, designers, whomever, if you're beholden to any company-wide or magazine practices to make sure that everything is equitable in terms of who you're working with, whether you work with a big studio or an individual person, if you're having just some sort of consistency in who you're looking for and what types of people that you would choose to work with.
Yeah. There is no mandate, but we are very aware at the magazine of having diversity and making sure that diverse ideas are represented. And we're always looking, we're not trying to check off any boxes with any particular assignments, but I think it makes the magazine richer to have those different perspectives and also different kinds of art. But it's something that we're very attuned to. I think less so big studio, small studio or, freelancer versus that kind of thing. But more diversity focused. Mm-hmm.
Hi. I would love to hear a little bit more about the way that writers and design is working together, or like the collaboration that is going on. You touched upon it a little bit earlier when you said that the writers would maybe change a headline depending on the cover.
Yeah.
What does the collaboration and the work together look like?
Well, in a kind of regular feature that's not going to have a super, some kind of interactive treatment. A lot of times, the story editors are really shaping those stories. And we do have a lot of meetings with them about, what the story is going to be about. I think, like I said, their stories are often evolving as we're designing for them. So, they do things sometimes like you'll read a piece of theirs and it'll sound like it's a profile, but actually that person's only just a way into an idea that they want to talk about. And they'll let you know that. So then your art has to be about an idea. It's interesting. I think Jake is a really unique editor. He really understands the visuals and values them. Sometimes the process that we have where, we have these conversations about what the art should be, and we're trying to push them to tell us, like, well, why do people want to read this story? Like, how is this different than the story that the New Yorker published on a similar topic, a month ago? He says that some of those conversations actually help him to clarify what the piece is. And then, like I said, we come up with a lot of different kinds of art solutions. A lot of times, the editors at the magazine, I think this is kind of unique, they don't want to give us a headline until they see what the art is, even on the inside. Because that relationship is so important, it's kind of everything. So, sometimes they'll give us a head and, and we'll, go in and import the imagery for a piece, and we'll realize, oh, it's a quote, the head's a quote, but it's not a picture of a person. Or, so those things, like, they're very closely connected, and there's a lot of communication about them. Some of the things that I am showing now in terms of the digital stuff, that is pretty new, that we're actually, basically shaping some of these stories. I think that our team loves a really long read, and some of the interactive stories, they should be shorter. And we're trying to get them to work with us on it. Like the climate issue that I showed had way too much text. But it was, one of the best writers that we work with, David Wallace-Wells, really respected, and we had a hard time getting them to cut it. Some of the more recent pieces that we've done, we did a piece called The 24-Hour Diaries, where it was for an issue on the future of work, and it was kind of this piece about the ways that people are working now and the flexibility that they have. And we basically had a bunch of people do video diaries of their work. And we actually hired a writer who, wasn't super attached to, was much more flexible about the text. And that ended up being, I think, a better experience because, they were able to be much more crafted, both the narrative and the imagery to fit together.
Hello, thank you for the talk. It was really inspiring. I have a question just out of curiosity, is if you could have the possibility to meet yourself in the past to the previous day before entering to the New York Times, what would be your advice?
My God, that's a hard question. Sorry, I'm like 2 hours of sleep. I'm like jet lagged. What would I tell myself? Let me think about that.
No pressure.
I know. I don't know if I have an answer to that. I mean, one thing that I would say when I entered the Times, I'd been doing a lot of book design, and I did not know how to make a magazine. I approached Janet Froelich, who was the creative director, and I showed her a bunch of books and some projects I had done on my own, and she brought me in. She gave me like a 3-week freelance stint. And one thing, I wasn't sure I would actually like it. I was like stressed out about like the learning curve, not knowing how to make it. I'd been making all this stuff that had, books that had like production value, and this was a really different thing. It's, kind of classic magazine challenge is taking the fonts, the brand fonts, and like using them in a new way every week, which was something that the magazine people were really good at, something that I wasn't used to. I got to pick all of my own fonts every week and, make a different format. And so I wasn't sure that I was going to love it. But I was open. And I guess that's something that I think about a lot, just, as students or younger people, like just kind of being open to, seeing what you like. And one of the things that, when I first started working at T, I actually started working at the Style magazine to start off with, and it wasn't like a very good fit for me. I love fashion, but I think I just needed different content to be inspired. And then when I got to the Sunday magazine, one of the things that I loved about it was the idea that you get to make things that are part of the idea, that you can affect the presentation in that way. And so that was a thing for me that I think was the thing that made me feel like I really found the thing I wanted to do. But I kind of was searching.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I actually answered your question. Sorry. Okay, thank you.